The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, I'm David Shearman, host of Politically Speaking. In these very, very fast-moving times, our programming here on Rogers is changing, and this is part of our COVID-19 update program, and it's my pleasure to welcome our MP, Alex Ruff. Alex, welcome. Good to have you here.
It's great to be back, David.
Now, Alex, I happen to be following your Twitter feed, and you said at 6 o'clock this morning, I'm going to grab a couple of hours sleep and be ready for a 9 o'clock teleconference. Is that what happened?
Yeah, it was actually at 10 o'clock, which I was pleasantly, when I double-checked my calendar, I was able to get a full 2 hours sleep because it was almost 7:30 before I got to bed, and the alarm was back off at 9:30 this morning. So I've been literally on the phone or on a teleconference or talking to constituents nonstop since 10 o'clock this morning.
Well, and you're taking an hour to talk to us, and that's great. We deeply appreciate that. Does this throw you back into your military days?
In some ways it does. It's actually the frustrating thing about being in the official opposition right now and not being in government, because this is sort of what I'm used to, at least on deployed operations. And even the last 5 years or 4 years of my career working at the Canadian Joint Operations Command, it's dealing with the most breaking deployed operations or even domestic operations. I mean, I was involved with some of the initial planning when we stood up the Ebola mission, and so it's sort of like it's frustrating to be there, helping out as constituents and Canadians as much as we can through our contacts and people that call into the office or reach out to us, but at the same time, not being at that forefront of being able to actually influence government as much as I'd like on, making those decisions. So, but you're right. This is sort of almost making me feel like I'm on a deployed operation right now.
Well, I'll bet you're eating better though than you would on a deployed operation.
Oh, no, hey, when I was in my last deployed operation in Baghdad, I've never ate so well in my life. The Americans had it set up. I could have had ice cream every meal in Baghdad. So don't. There's certain deployments where I've eaten nothing but rations every day for almost 6 months straight, 3 meals a day. But my last deployment, I was spoiled when it came to the food.
But you were also, being in Ottawa, you were also right in the center of where the decisions were being made in the House of Commons, were you not?
I was and I wasn't. And again, that's some of the frustration things out there, from a constituents that are expecting, all of us to be able to leverage things is the learning curve's still steep. But when you table legislation, normally it goes through a very deliberate process that, all MPs, you have that unique opportunity. You're not unique, but you have that opportunity to study it. There's days involved in being prepared and where you have to table it, how long it sits there. So all of those rules were sort of not circumvented, but special arrangements made between the four major parties and negotiated on how this was going to happen. So it was agreed to. Everybody kept the faith that there was only going to be 32 members in the House. Yesterday, actually sitting, we had 11 as the official opposition, and so really well represented. Fortunately, we had a number of our MPs that were still within Ontario. That even though they were from British Columbia or Alberta, the government supported our leader and our House leader, Andrew Scheer and Candice Bergen, to get them in on Government of Canada aircraft. So that they were able to attend and everybody else was able to drive in. However, good, I'd almost argue, military prudent planning. There was a number of us from Ontario that could drive here that were on standby just in case, especially after as news broke late Monday night, that there was potentially that the legislation that was being presented wasn't what was initially negotiated in terms of just getting the aid package out. So there was a little bit of preparedness just in case something was going to try to get passed that wouldn't fly for Canadians and really our parliamentary oversight. But fortunately, It was a very long day yesterday for those members that are the leadership teams from all the parties, specifically the House leaders and the leaders themselves, and mainly the finance minister and the shadow critics with the respective parties. They did a lot of work, and it wasn't till 3 o'clock this morning before the actual negotiated legislation was put on the table that everybody could agree to, which then allowed it to go through the House in a very expedited fashion. And it wasn't until it actually got tabled that all the rest of us actually even had access to the actual legislation. You're only getting sort of discussions in general because there's a lot of very, anybody can see it online now, but sensitive information in there that you need to make sure everybody's sort of on board if you want to get that unanimous consent to get it passed quickly.
I thought it was really interesting, though, that in some ways, we could say the system works as it should. I've lived long enough to have been around when there have been minority parliaments, both in the Canadian, at the federal level and the provincial level, and this give and take that seems to have happened is the norm, and that I think Mr. Scheer has done a very good job in being quite literally Her Majesty's loyal opposition, in saying, just a minute, Mr. Trudeau, there are some things we need to have a conversation about, and that's fair. And the other parties seem to be working well together with the Liberals to make things work. I'm sure each of them had their own little bits to add and wanted to see, and isn't that what a minority government is all about?
It is. I mean, obviously very unique. I don't know if anything's happened quite the way it happened yesterday in the history of the country, because it did put some, very unique circumstances or constraints around how everything happened yesterday. However, without a doubt, all members of Parliament that were involved in the debate and in the preparation and getting us to where the legislation that got passed early this morning deserve credit, because in the end, every single one of us were working towards getting the necessary support and aid out to Canadians, and we're committed to making sure it got through so it could get to the Senate. And my understanding, although I haven't had a chance to get on the news at all today yet, is Senate's just within the last hour passed it themselves, and the document was off to Rideau Hall to get the Governor General sign off, from my understanding.
If nothing else, that's got to be the fastest passage of legislation in recent history.
Absolutely.
And that's a good thing for all Canadians. What was it like? What was the mood in the House? As I presume you were either waiting in the wings or you were watching it in another part of the building. What was the mood among your colleagues as you sat there?
Well, to be fair, there was a lot of incredulity, if that's the right term, with just what was being initially proposed, because it did catch all the opposition parties by surprise, and that they were trying to introduce potentially legislation that would have gave them basically de facto authority over the ability to raise taxes and spend dollars. Government coffers dollars without any type of oversight, is my understanding. And to be honest, the media, some of the media outlets had saw that initial draft legislation. I still haven't to this point, and it really doesn't matter anymore. So there was a lot of concern, and I think that's what got a lot of the people in the media up in arms, and a lot of our members. So that first bit was just, all right, why are they doing this? What is the logic behind it, and why would they try to think that we would accept this? So that was the first portion of the day. And then the other challenge is obviously, as everybody's coming in, is just that lack of information, because as I mentioned earlier, that document is quite tightly held. It's by sort of convention, can't be shared until it gets tabled, other than the agreement within sort of the negotiating teams. So therefore, a lot of, all right, what's going on? And again, for me, I just spent the time working out of my office, talked to a lot of constituents and answered a lot of emails while I was waiting. And I guess the advantage I had over some of them was my past military experience put me in good stead, because we're quite used to the hurry up and wait when it comes to certain things. So it was just a long day. But ultimately, as the night progressed, and I sat in the lobby in West Block right from about 9:30 till 6:30 this morning, and it became more and more aware, at least from where we were sitting and my side and the people, the MPs I was discussing with, that hey, we're getting there. And arrangements being, that everybody's sort of seeing on the same page, and we were able to get to that common ground, which I think, which allowed the legislation to be passed this morning.
This, of course, has been fodder for social media and the mainstream media as well. But I'm just kind of sitting back and reflecting on this. What you're describing, as I said earlier, is a process that the House of Commons process worked. The fact that the Senate has passed the legislation with its due discussion means that our constitutional system is working, that it's off to Rideau Hall means that the Governor General is still present. And lest we forget, if there is any legal review needed, I'm quite sure the Supreme Court is prepared to act as quickly as possible if challenges are brought forward on any legislation in the next little while. So I think we can have some. My personal opinion, if I can offer it, is that we've got a pretty good. Our system is intact. It's doing what it needs to do, and it's doing. The checks and balances are in place.
Absolutely, and I mean that was part of some of the negotiating and stuff. That if you review the piece of legislation, which all Canadians can, I'll just fire that out there now. If you Google it, or I believe it's under www.fin. fin.canada.ca, so off the finance department's website, you can actually review the legislation there. I'm not sure it's up on the House's website, but there has been pieces added in there to ensure exactly that, the oversight. So ideally, it wouldn't have to get to the Supreme Court. It actually, the authority now is within the Finance Committee and the Health Committee, who are allowed to meet via technology, via video teleconference, and can call that at any time. And as well, the parliamentary, or the Auditor General, I believe, is going to review everything that gets passed and is mandated to, and so all that agreement's there, so that oversight's there, so Canadians can rest assured that whatever decisions are being made, that it's all sort of everybody can be held to account, and the government can be held to account that their money is being spent prudently, and regardless of the obviously the unique circumstances and the urgency that money needs to get out there, so it can get out to the Canadians that need it. However, at the same time, it's going to go to the right people, because if not, the people will know about it. There won't be any way to hide this.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear, Alex, because I was also intrigued by one of the other provisions that I thought I heard in the about the legislation, is that the House can be called back. There's oversight with the Finance Committee, but isn't there something about the opposition having the ability to call the House back, or did I mishear something?
Well, that's actually what the motion that was passed just before March break. I was in that morning, and that was something that caught us all by surprise. There had been sort of rumors the previous day or so, but it got negotiated right up till 10 o'clock. It's actually kind of funny the way it played out in the House that Friday, I believe it was 13th of March there, that last Friday before spring break. And when that legislation was being drafted and that allowed us to break until April 20th, in order to respect the recommendations of our phenomenal medical and health officials, was that idea that we would break, but within that legislation is that provision that any one of the four House leaders will make sure we get back on April 20th, although it requires all four of them to provide that unanimous consent in order to extend the suspension of Parliament past April 20th, which I'm sure will be a discussion point, although I have a feeling we're going to have to be back, and we should be back. It's just that how we do that, again, is it with some sort of reduced quorum, with the challenges there. But to go back to, history, when Parliament burnt down, when Centre Block burnt down, I believe in 1916, the House sat the next day. So all of this is very doable. It's practical challenges, but it's all doable. And I personally am a believer that's our job. As much as our offices and everybody are working very hard to work with our constituents, and it's tough, especially the vast majority of all the MPs, their families and everything are back in the riding, so it's tough to be away when everything's going on. But my personal opinion is we should be here in Ottawa. You still have me, Dave?
Oh, yes, we got you, Alex.
Yeah,
that's part of the technology that you'll see from time to time, is that we get a little bit of a screen freeze, but not to worry. We've still got audio.
So the other piece, I was just going to finish off with the story, was all the House leaders or representatives from each of the major parties, including the Green, were able to speak that Friday morning. And so Mark Strahl, our whip, went first. Then it moved down to the Bloc and then the NDP, and it got to the Green. But because the legislation had been amended that Friday morning so quickly, and it still wasn't done, Elizabeth May got up to speak because normally she isn't always afforded that opportunity based on convention and only having 3 seats in the House, I believe, that she got to speak. But the point was the actual legislation that had to get read out hadn't been delivered to the Liberal House leader yet. So while she was speaking, which a lot of people that would have been watching it wouldn't have likely noticed or saw because the camera was on her, it was Pablo, the House leader for the Liberals, actually making this motion, keep talking, because he didn't actually have the document, so he didn't want the floor passed to him because he actually didn't have the document to read yet. So sometimes there are some funny things that happen in the House that does provide a little bit of humor and keep the mood somewhat light, even despite the trying times that we're dealing with. And sometimes because that place does get very partisan, which again I'm still somewhat frustrated at, is that sometimes on all sides the level of sort of partisan attacks that go on. Sometimes they're very well warranted. I mean, I will admit, even since my short time there, that sometimes, especially during question period, I get quite frustrated at the lack of answers that are coming out of the government. But that's the nature of the beast, and I'm not making excuses because I'm pretty sure other governments in the past had similar reputations.
Oh, absolutely. It's a fascinating exploration to go into some of those debates in the past. But it's interesting that you said that the Liberal House leader kept saying to Elizabeth May, keep going, because I'm quite sure she wouldn't be enjoying the moment in the spotlight.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Now, let's go back a bit to the legislation that you passed specifically. I'm not asking you to give us all of the details because I'm sure they will roll out. But is it pretty much as the Prime Minister has announced, or are there some things that, have yet to happen, or were not included in that, or were new in that legislation?
So I do believe there's a few new ones, and I can't speak to the specifics yet because, as I said, I've got access to it. I haven't been able to go through line by line, clause by clause, the whole document myself yet. But it does basically cover everything that he's announced over the last week. So some key things is, there's 27 billion in direct support to Canadians. There's 55 billion in deferred taxation, basically. And so some of the challenges were that in some of these new benefits, again, they were initially called the emergency care benefit, I believe, and the emergency support benefit, and I think they're now wrapped up under a new title, the two of them. But the ability to deliver that mainly through a couple tools, employment insurance, and it's basically, that's the way to summarize in general, these benefits is it's basically allowing employment insurance to be delivered or an equivalent to it to people that normally don't qualify. And at the same time, in order to shorten some of the time periods and to get approval for that spending, that's what required the royal assent and new legislation to be passed. So those are key things. There's things in there about our temporary foreign workers. There's things in there about support to our farmers. One of the things still that's not quite clear, and it's still, I think, will have to get figured out, and the government's going to have to come up with a solution for. We've offered some recommendations to them, I know, in the last week or so via our shadow ministers, is more for small business. It's the biggest concern that's been coming into the office this past few days. The first few days as everything was breaking out, obviously during over spring break, was, hey, people stuck that are concerned about how they were going to get home. And so that was I would argue, the majority of the phone calls that we were getting. Now there's still a few of those. There's still people all over the world. I think there's still almost 3 million Canadians still all over outside of Canada right now. However, it's definitely flipped to more and more concerns from small businesses that are just trying to make ends meet. And so now that this legislation's passed, it's going to allow the government to bring these programs into the forefront. One of the other things that's in the new legislation is actually allows them to provide additional resources to Service Canada and the departments that are front and center, because some of the complaints and it even happened on Monday, a lot of their phone lines are just overwhelmed. So they're going to reallocate. I think the number that I think I read quickly this morning, up to 13,000 of the government employees. Although that number, it could be 1,300. I'm pretty sure I heard the minister say 1,300 last night during the debate, but I read this morning 13,000. So I don't know if there's a typo one way or the other. But move some of the public servants that aren't working right now because of shutdown and having to work remotely, and not all departments are, and taking those resources and putting them to work to support the delivery of these much needed packages out to the Canadians that need them.
I've heard from, in some quarters, there is real concern about the agricultural segment in Canada, and of course that's a big piece of us in Grey Bruce. Did you hear anything specific for agriculture? I'm thinking of, for example, our beef farmers, because most of their product goes to the States. Anything hear about that?
Well, yeah, and so some of that, that crosses at multiple levels of government there. Obviously, some of it's with businesses, and I mean, that was some concerns that I know Bill Walker's been working very hard on our behalf and the provincial government to, when they defined essential services, and if you review that list, and I'm sure you'll try to get Bill on here shortly, is, we got to protect our supply chain, and food's absolutely essential. Our farm repair people, I'd taken some phone calls from some of the businesses in the area about that, and when I said, no, you guys will be protected, but again, that's a provincial decision. Some of the aid that is going to the agriculture, there is, I think, upwards of $5 billion, and again, I might be wrong. Out of that package that's specifically targeted towards farmers. It doesn't address, and there's still concerns, because you got to remember, we've been, the beef industry in particular, but a bunch of the different agricultural sectors have had a really hard year due to the weather last year, due to introduction of the carbon taxes hit the crop people in particular that were having to dry crops. And then the blockades threw a wrench into things too, and so they haven't got ahead yet. And then this COVID-19 and the impact that's having on the markets is crazy. Although I know I've been following some of our local beef producers that sell locally, not the big ones necessarily, and their people are turning to their local producers and buying locally, which some of them are saying, wow, they're selling out literally. So, but there is a huge challenge still with our processing capacity that is definitely challenging the beef sector. So there's more to be done, and again, it's something that'll be one of my priorities here in the next couple of days, is to fully understand that. So as the questions and concerns are coming in to me, I can at least steer them in the right direction, and again continue to feed into the Minister of Agriculture the concerns that are coming from our farmers to make sure those packages are correctly formatted and packaged together, that the support is going to those that most need it.
That's good to hear, Alex, because I have also heard concerns expressed about our processing capacity. But I think for people in Grey Bruce, the sign of the gravity of the situation, if I can use that word, is the Katy market is closed. And when the Katy, I don't think I've ever heard of the Katy market closing, and that's quite something.
So is it closed this week? I can't.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I was busy yesterday.
Yes,
Last
it is.
week they still ran it. I know, just with the they're not running the flea market side of the house,
No.
obviously, but the sale itself was still going on for because it's part of our supply chain. I know they're not mandated to close. But they're maintaining social data, and it's just the buyers and sellers, and they're doing as much as they can remotely. So I know unless it's changed in the last 24 hours, my understanding was that they were still actually functioning, just in having to adapt the way that the sale is going on.
That's good to hear, because I thought I read the announcement the other way, but if they decided to go ahead, and yes, they are permitted under the provincial legislation, that's good to hear, because I'm going to tell you, if the Katy market had closed, the agricultural side, I'd be saying we're getting pretty close to the apocalypse. We're getting very close to the apocalypse. Those are important parts, as you say, they're important parts of our supply chain.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to scare people.
No.
David, it's not. People should stay, optimistic. We're very fortunate in Canada. We're in a lot better positions than a lot of other countries are, and so stay. We'll figure this out, right? I'm an internal optimist. I think people need to stay positive. There is still going to be challenges coming. The spread of COVID-19 is still going to go up. The numbers you're going to still see to go up, and especially as testing becomes more and more available across the country, the numbers will naturally go, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are asymptomatic or symptomatic.
Asymptomatic, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That they're not showing it, but they're likely carrying it, or it's minimal signs or minimal impact on them because they're healthy otherwise. And again, this is a brand new virus, so that's the challenges that I know the medical experts are struggling with, and the doctors, is exactly not understanding the full impacts, effects, and being able to to handle it. And so this, I know you've had experts on over the last week or so that are much more up to speed on exactly the details of the disease, but my point is it is going to continue to grow. It's still going to impact more and more people, but as long as that curve can continue to be flattened, so we don't overwhelm our medical services, our hospitals, and keep those that critically need the support available so they can get help. I think I'm confident. We'll get through this.
I agree. I think that there's a lot of positivity out there. I think Dr. Era, who I interviewed recently, was still quite hopeful that yes, it'll be a difficult time, but yes, if we do the things that we're being asked to do, we'll get through this, and we'll get through this as best we can. And what I'm also hearing is a lot of people being positive, supporting each other. It's really interesting. I go out take my dog for a walk, and a lot more people are saying hello, and a lot more people are actually out walking. I was on my way over to the studio this afternoon. I looked. My golly, there are people out actually exercising. That's not a bad thing.
I recommend people watch, those that have access to social media. I know I shared it yesterday or the day before. Chris Hadfield, Canadian astronaut, some recommendations he was making to people on, treat this as much as it's tough. You need to stay positive, but treat it as an opportunity to either reconnect with old friends, to start a project in the house, to try to get your fitness regime back on track if it fell off from what your New Year's resolution was. So read a book, expand your learning, challenge your mind, and use it that way. That if you're one of those unfortunate ones that are basically either laid off, can't get to work, or you're in self-isolation because you might have been exposed.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break, Alex, and we're going to come back and have a further conversation because I've still got a few more questions. Friends, this is Politically Speaking. My guest is Alex Ruff, and we'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Treaty in Cree is Nascomitoin, an oral agreement, and our agreements were always spoken. For George Spence, the core of treaty was Owen, to help one another.
And so we, the commissioners,
He was there for the making of Treaty 9, where the Cree were told,
we will honor this agreement together for as long as the sun shines and the waters flow.
the Cree made their mark because they were assured that the land would be shared and they would always be able to harvest what they needed. George Spence was my great-grandfather. In his life, he saw many promises of the treaty go unfulfilled.
Treaties were essential to the creation of Canada. First Nations still fight for the agreements to be honored.
What kind of show do you want to see on Rogers TV? What interests you? Log on to rogerstv.com, fill out a show proposal, and tell us about your segment idea. We want to know what you want to see. Rogers TV, only on Rogers.
The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest is Alex Ruff, the MP for Bruce Grey Owen Sound. Alex is in Ottawa. I'm here in the studio in Owen Sound, and we're using all kinds of interesting technology to make this work. Alex, welcome back.
Great to be back.
Now, one of the things I think that people are and you will have alluded to this earlier, is that you were doing a lot of calls from your constituents and taking calls and stuff. And I noticed that your constituency office is closed, although people can contact you by telephone and by email and by and set up private appointments. Is that working reasonably well for staff?
Yeah, I think it is, yeah, because again, I'm worried about my staff capacity, so technology's come a long way. I actually give the House of Commons a lot of credit that they used this last election as an opportunity to update the sort of the backbone and the software that's being used by us. So all of us can literally work from home fairly easily. There's a few challenges if you're not on a House computer or like a issued parliamentary computer or laptop, which I'm the only one that has one of those right now out of the staff. But you can log in from your home personal computer. Security's still protected. And so it's actually, we're adjusting on a few of the things, but the House has been very supportive on the IT side of the House, so we can communicate that way. But I'm maintaining at least two of my staff at the constituency office that are in there in their normal hours, and everybody else is sort of working from home, and they're able just to return calls, answer emails. The only challenge, and as you saw, maybe, I don't know if you did see it, I put out a press release yesterday afternoon.
Yes, I saw that. Yes.
Yeah, just really repackaging everything that's been announced over the last week but really key contact numbers, because we were kind of, was rightfully pointed out by one of the staff, getting a lot of phone calls from seniors or people that don't have internet access, aren't on social media, and they're not getting all the information necessarily down on as it's getting announced in the very fast cycle of television. And it was how do they get this information? So we thought it prudent. I put that out. I'll put another one together within the next few days that captures really what this legislation and any changes that are coming and I know the government is working on some infographics and some ways that we can get this information out to people, because rightfully so, we have huge aspects of the community in the riding that aren't on the internet, partly because they don't have access or reliable access, which is something that was brought up. It was brought up in the House yesterday during the debate, and so we need to continue to work on that. But how do we get that information out there? So I know the local media, the print media, is helping. I know there's different aspects of the municipality. It was one of the things we talked with Dr. Ara, if I'm pronouncing his name.
Yes, Ian Ara.
Last, there was a great call. We're going to do one again Friday. Great cooperation between all levels of government. We had a teleconference with the medical officials last week. We're going to do another one Friday morning. But what was brought up is our Amish and Mennonite community is how are they getting the information? And so Dr. Ara had met with them himself, and hopefully that information is getting out there, because obviously they're not on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, getting the updates.
That's absolutely right. And I hope that the government going forward will take this to heart, that there's an awful lot of people in rural Canada who have poor, variable, non-existent internet access, or for cultural reasons are not connected to the internet, and the Amish community is a case in point. And I suppose that's the responsibility of the opposition to hold the government's feet to the fire on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. We're finding out right now that having this reliable rural high-speed broadband out to all Canadians by 2030. Well, when we hit a crisis like this, I bet you they wish that it was a lot more reliable and a lot more broader right now to all Canadians. So again, to be fair, this isn't something you can build overnight. There's huge challenges with it. However, it is definitely a priority that we should be really focused on now, because we're seeing what happens when you don't have that access.
Sure. Now let's switch from the immediate past to the near-term future, and dare I say the longer-term future. Dr. Ara has made it clear that this is something, the COVID-19 virus is not going to go away. He has used words like weeks, months for some of the things we will have to be maintaining. But still, the business of government still has to continue. What's your take on where the government will be headed, and what's the plan for the House of Commons in the foreseeable future?
Just 2 seconds here. I just got to ignore something. There, we're good. So, great question, David. So I think that one of the challenges is we still don't know just the scope and how long this is going to take. And my understanding, again, Dr. Ara might have mentioned this, is that we need to get the majority of the population, like 70 to 80% of it, to get to that herd immunity, I guess, for lack of a better term, which is either going to get done through a vaccine, which is what my understanding is likely still a year away, or people having got it, recovered from it, and providing that the virus isn't mutating to the point that you're picking up another version of it, which we still don't know. So, but to get to your point about not only Parliament and figuring out solutions to that, and I'll come back to that in a second, is how do we ensure the economy keeps moving so we don't have that collapse? And that's exactly what the government's working hard on, and we're trying to provide that recommendations to them on how they can best do that, so that this doesn't become go from a short-term, mid-term problem into a long-term problem. Although, to be fair, I think everybody will acknowledge there's going to be some repercussions that we're going to feel on this, that we're not going to recover from overnight. It's going to take years to get us back to sort of where we were prior to this happening. On Parliament, how do we get back and figure that out? There, just some of us were banding around the ideas yesterday. You could move us, if space is the issue, you could move us into different locations. There's a lot of the convention centers in Ottawa that aren't being used now because you're not having that big gathering where you could respect the space.
Isn't there a big hockey arena or something out in Canada?
Yep. There's a
it used to be called the
Corral
Center, but
yeah,
I think it's
at the airport. There's the one convention center that's set up and used a lot. So there's that idea where you could do it, where you could respect the 2-meter distance, and you could still deliver things. Some people are putting forth the idea of using technology, allowing us to do this type of what we're doing right now for Parliament. There's risks with that though, in making sure. You're not, removing levels of oversight. There's a reason why, as I'm becoming aware now, that sometimes Parliament's maybe not as efficient as we'd like it to be, because it does allow that sober, not only the Senate's, ability to be that sober second thought, it allows that deliberate analysis of legislation that's coming through so that something isn't getting passed without that level of oversight and analysis taking place. So the problem when you go and you make it very, very efficient, as much as that's important, I think we've just demonstrated yesterday that we can get things done very, very quickly utilizing the same tools that we have there with some creative thinking. One of the ones that I proposed, I proposed 2 things. One, a bit old school with the military, quarantine all of us here in Ottawa, lock us down, and we're not allowed to go home, back to the ridings, because ultimately our primary focus is to ensure that the government is getting the resources out there and supporting them to make sure that's happening as Parliament, and at the same time making sure the legislation that still needs to continue because the government or Canada still needs to function. That's one option. Another option.
Before you go any further on that, Alex, I think that did happen in English history about 400 years ago.
Yeah.
The king quarantined Parliament, and they didn't like it. He basically imprisoned Parliament. So we got to be careful with that. Interesting idea, though. Interesting idea.
Well, and the other thing is do what we sort of did yesterday. In the military, all the time, I would have, when you have a limited resources, whether you're a platoon commander or a company commander, and you're doing what we, a patrol task table or matrix, and you have multiple tasks. I'm thinking back to my first deployment in Bosnia, where I was, you had a small platoon or a platoon of 37 soldiers, and yet we had to do section patrols, like short-range patrols, long-range patrols. I had to mean, security on the camp. And then you had to give people sort of downtime. And so you put together a sort of a rotation based on 3 or 4 teams. And so I think we could, contemplate doing that as a solution to how do we continue to Parliament function is break the House down into sections of 3 or 4 like groups, like 33 or 25% of us at any one time sitting. Another, then even if you have to maintain our own health and safety and to make sure we're not spreading it, you go into self-isolation or quarantine for, you say you do the first part for 2 or 3 weeks, you then do the next part for 2 or 3 weeks, and then you're back in the riding for 2 or 3 weeks, and you could, sort of cycle the whole team through. I'm not saying that's going to be the solution. I'm just saying there's lots of creative ways that you could allow Parliament to still continue to sit versus us basically being in some level of suspension here for the foreseeable future, because despite this being a priority and we need to make sure that and the government's focused on that, there's all sorts of other legislation that needs to get passed in order to continue to make this country function.
Well, I think there's the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention, but I think it's also fair to say that crisis is often the mother of invention and new processes and new procedures. So your ideas may have some merit, and they may actually bear fruit in a few years. And I'm quite sure that once we're over the hump on this one, and it may be a few months or a year or so down the road, there will be lots of review and lessons learned exercises, and maybe some legislation that will streamline our governance processes as a country, and even within the House of Commons and the Senate.
Absolutely.
So what's, for you, to get back to my original question, you're just going to be there in Ottawa in the short term? Are you coming back to the riding, or what's your personal plan?
Well, yeah, so my personal plan is trying to manage it, as I think you're aware, and maybe not all constituents are. You know, I'm in a unique circumstance too, where I have a 6-year-old daughter, but I'm separated. We do a 50-50 custody arrangement, so we're trying to respect that, although with school now being canceled, you know, for the foreseeable future, and again, provincial decision, but, you know, if I was a betting man, I would say I'm not optimistic that they're going to be back in school in a physical setting, you know, before September. That's just my guess. I could be completely wrong on that. So I'm trying to, you know, I have to manage that on a personal note with my to maintain taking care of my daughter. So my ex can work too, so I'm trying to balance that out, and so we're trying to respect the schedule. So so that's that. So there's a good chance, I think, you know, and there's more cases here in Ottawa, that I may just stay here for the next week or two because I'm able to communicate. But I will be back in accordance with the normal parliamentary calendar. The first 2 weeks of April, I will be back in the riding, working from there. But the challenge is I can't go out and knock on doors or shake hands, but you know, it's just good to be back there working as well, where I can get, where you do sometimes get that local feel that you can't get remotely, despite, you know, having to maintain the social distancing. So, and as I said, I really think we're going to be back sitting in some format on April 20th.
Yeah, you mentioned social distancing. That's one of the key things that key messages that Dr. Era has said. It will be very important for us, and the idea of going out and having coffee with friends, or stopping at the Tim Hortons or wherever that I know all politicians like to do, and like to kind of, excuse the expression, press the flesh, get to know people and get to hear their concerns. Well, that's not happening, and it's just not safe these days.
But there's other ways that we can do it. I know we're trying to return as many, and I'm personally trying to return more phone calls. You know, obviously that's the one advantage of not sitting this week or next, is it basically gives me the equivalent of what it's like when I'm back, you know, regardless of physical location, but when I'm back in the constituency office, it's allowing me to talk to a lot more constituents because I'm not sitting in the House and dealing with some of the, you know, and again, the organizations, the lobbyists that want to meet when you're in Ottawa and stuff like that. So it's freeing me. It is actually freeing me up very much to talk and focus on constituent issues and not get sort of waylaid into some of the other discussions, although it's all important stuff too on bigger issues that impact the country as a whole. It does give me more time to focus on what I think my priority role is in representing the constituents of Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Now, you were on the Veterans Affairs Committee, if I'm not mistaken, and I guess with those committees, all Commons committees are on hold for the moment, correct?
Yeah, other than finance and health, public safety, I think, can get called back as well if they need to. Yeah, so it's just on hold now, but there's the work's still being done by the government. Those departments haven't closed down. I mean, it's a huge issue. Obviously, you know, the power of social media. You know, once I'm here, I'm trying to get and understand the primary study we're doing with Veterans Affairs right now is with the backlog on claims processing, which is huge. It's over 44,000 files that they're behind on, and it's got consistently worse over the last 3 years. And so I made not the mistake. I'm really super. I'm able to help out, but again, it's how messaging goes out there. I told a number of people saying, look, I just want to try to get the ground truth from and the types of files that aren't meeting the 16-week standard that the Department of Veterans Affairs and the government has said is what they're trying to meet for at least 84% of the files that are claims that are being put forth. And it went out on social media, and it kind of got skewed as it literally got across the country there a couple weeks ago, was that, hey, Alex Ruff is going to solve your personal claim with Veterans Affairs Canada. And so I been getting inundated with emails saying, here, sir, Mr. Ruff, and those that are still serving that know I'm a retired colonel. Hey, sir, can you solve here's my problem? And it's like, sorry, I want to understand the scope of your issue and what I can do, but I can't personally, don't have the time to intervene on everybody's behalf, but that's not my job. But I can at least bring their file to their own MP and direct them that way if they hadn't reached out. But at the same time, it's given me that very good understanding of the ground truth of the type of files, although it is pretty wide, that are being impacted by the backlog. And one of the biggest surprises, and we brought in the some Canadian Armed Forces personnel to actually committee before the break, was how many that are still serving. Because just because you're still in the military, you still have that right to, if you're entitled to some sort of disability claim, it can start right away. And so I was just surprised how many of them were really caught up in that, because normally the advantage they have over somebody that's retired and maybe is in a remote part of the country or don't have access to the same services, when you're still serving, you have access to a lot of still great benefits, but connectivity, and it's easy to get a hold of you. I was surprised how many of the backlog there was attributed to people still in uniform. So it's unique challenges. I'm glad it's our primary study for the Veterans Affairs Committee, because I think it's something we absolutely need to get out there, and it's almost comparable to the challenge the government's facing right now, that with the COVID, with the EI cases and how do you deal with the increased traffic in the files, and how can you process them quickly so you're not creating more stress on people when they're expecting some sort of support or some sort of compensation, and yet they can't get a hold of you. They can't get a hold of the appropriate. That puts an additional stress on people. So hopefully we'll get it sorted out.
Well, let's hope so. I know that some of the places in social media that I happen to follow who are veterans are saying very clearly, hey, there's a problem. It's good to hear that the committee is paying attention, and I'm sure that you also have a bit of a challenge, because you don't have the RSM or you don't have a junior officer to say, deal with this, and you've got to deal with it yourself and see the larger picture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, other things that are going on, is the government primarily focused on the COVID-19 response and everything else is kind of on hold at this point?
Well, I mean, the normal function of government and all the departments are still flowing for the most part. I just know some of them are challenged with respect to trying to work remotely, because as much as technology's come a long way, not every department works or has the necessary resources to work remotely. So that's, as I said, that's going to free up, I think, some departments, and it'll be frustrating for obviously certain people that rely on different aspects. And so, but at the same time, I think, as much as possible, they're trying to keep things moving forward. So if you just repeat your question again, David, there, I forgot the second part.
Well, I was just going to also ask you, Alex, just shifting a little bit to the city of Ottawa itself, it's sometimes it's a bit of a bubble, but at the same time, are the streets still active? Are people still are the traffic volumes much less? What's your sense of the mood of the people in Ottawa?
Absolutely. As I said, there was a number of, even to take it a little bit more province-wide, some of the other Ontario MPs that came to the House yesterday in case they were needed or that were needed. I know Michael Chong was in the House all day yesterday, and him and I chatted. He's making that drive from Halton Hills, I believe, in Fergus area, and he just couldn't believe just how little traffic. And Doug Shipley from Barrie Springwater or Mondante had come up. Doug made it in sort of record time because there was absolutely no traffic anywhere. And even here in Ottawa, definitely traffic is considerably down. There's still vehicles out and about. You still have a lot of services. This is a city of a million people. So there is still a fair bit moving around, but it's not the same scope. There's no rush hour going on really right now. And
OC Transpo is still working so far.
Yeah, no, well, buses are as the Premier announced, transportation still required. They just, the idea is obviously keep people spread out, but when they're taking it, but that's a lot of people that don't own vehicles or live far enough away. That still need and are part of the essential services need to get to work.
Well, I was just thinking too, in Ottawa, one of the things that happens in May is the Tulip Festival. Obviously, the festival itself will be canceled, but you can't stop those tulips from showing up. They will be there.
And as you say, if you're not in self-quarantine or self-isolation, because you've shown some symptoms, you can get out there and you can be outside. People just got to respect the distances. So I'm sure once the tulips are up, a lot of people will be walking around the, along the canal and Dow's Lake, where most of those tulips are, and taking that opportunity to enjoy the spring and the, I guess the optimism or the positivity that comes out of enjoying nature and tulips. I think I'm not a big flower person, but if I had to name my favorite flower, it likely would be a tulip.
For sure. And I think that's one of the things that we have to look forward to. I was, as I came to the studio today for the first time, I didn't have to put on a winter jacket or boots. And in Grey Bruce, that means spring is coming, to be sure.
Although I'm sure back in our riding, even pretty much anywhere in Canada, we're not out of it yet. We'll get another snowfall, I'm pretty sure, before the end of the spring.
Oh, that's guaranteed. Even though I've taken the snow tires off one of my vehicles, I'm being really optimistic this year because I have to be. So now that we're into a new frame and into a new sort of a new way of living, at least in the short term, Alex, you'll be back in the riding in April, so people may see you out and about at that point. But you certainly are still available by the usual communication means, telephone, email, that kind of stuff. That your staff is working and dealing with issues at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. We're 100% responsive. Not as much, obviously not on the weekend. I will sometimes, if I can get to it, will try to be responsive. And if somebody titles the email as urgent, I will do my best to get to it on Saturday and Sunday. I do know I answered quite a number of them this past weekend, but obviously I'm not making my staff work on the weekends. They're already working full out, and again, a lot harder than normal. And so, not saying that they don't work hard all the time. They absolutely do, but they're doing their darndest because they recognize just how important, especially the unique cases where we still have Canadians stuck. And it's surprising. There's a lot of people in our riding that travel to some pretty remote areas around the world and some unique circumstances. So anything we can do to help them out and get them in contact with Global Affairs Canada, the consular services in whatever country they're in, or the embassies, and so that they can get back, or even just trying to, the government.
I hate to cut you off, Alex, but we're just about out of time. I want to thank you for your time today. I'll let you get on to your next teleconference, and I'm sure we'll be talking again. I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking, and my guest has been Alex Ruff, MPP for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
MP.
Sorry, MP, you're right.